Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Chad Sarwa, and I'm the Associate Director of Communications and Marketing for the Rose Art Museum at Brandeis University. I'm so grateful you've joined us tonight for Salman Toor's Brown Boys, a program offered in conjunction with the exhibition Salman Toor No Ordinary Love, organized by the Baltimore Museum of Art and curated by Dr. Asma Naeem, our guest this evening. I hope you visit the Rose in person to experience this exhibition, which is on view through February 11th. It's intimate, moving, and not to be missed. I'm honored to introduce the curator of this fabulous exhibition, Dr. Asma Naeem, the Dorothy Wagner Wallace Director of the Baltimore Museum of Art. Dr. Naeem previously served as the BMA's Eddie C. and C. Sylvia Brown Chief Curator. In addition to Salman Toor No Ordinary Love, she has organized exhibitions on the work of such artists as Candace Bretz, Isaac Julian, and Valerie Maynard. Her most recent exhibition, The Culture, Hip Hop and Contemporary Art in the 21st Century, co-organized with the St. Louis Art Museum, was a sweeping look at the hip hop movement's social and art historical impact as an American and global phenomenon. Prior to the BMA, she served as the Associate Curator of Prints, Drawings, and Media Arts at the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery, where she presented, among other shows, an early career retrospective of the work of Titus Kapar and a historical and contemporary exploration of the silhouette through the lens of gender, race, and technology. She has written widely on American art, contemporary art, the South Asian diaspora, and museum studies. Her book, Out of Earshot, Sound Technology and the Power in American Art through 1847 and 1897 was published by the University of California Press in 2020. Naeem holds a BA in Art History and Political Science from Johns Hopkins University and a PhD in Art History from the Maine University of Maryland. We are very grateful to have her as our guest tonight. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Asma Naeem.
Hello and good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining me tonight. A chilly night here in Baltimore, and I'm sure a much colder one up in Boston. Thanks also to the kind folks at the Rose Art Museum at Brandeis University for inviting me, and to Chad and Manen for helping me with the technical logistics tonight. It's my pleasure to be sharing my thoughts on the work of Salman Toor, one of the greatest painters of his generation, with you. What follows is an interweaving of histories, a personal history of mine, art histories, and our shared humanity. So with that, I will begin the conversation. My father used to declare himself the best-looking man in Maryland. At gatherings, large and small, he would do this straight-faced, with slightly upturned lips, trying to suppress his glee, waiting for affirmation from my mother, my sister Aisha, my brother Omar, and me. After a well-timed pause, he would then recount how as a boy in the 1950s, he was well on his way to a lifelong career in the Indian film industry, hand-picked off the streets of Jodhpur for his striking good looks, to act in the movie Footpath, 1953, alongside the renowned actors Meena Kumari and Dilip Kumar. For years, when it was just our family, one of us, usually Omar, would bring this up at random moments, teasing him. "Hey, Baba, weren't you in Bollywood movies or something when you were little?" My father would always perk up. "Yes, Footpath with Dilip Kumar and Meena Kumari." The declaration would hang in the air as my father waited for us to pose more questions or even ask to see the film. It was the 1980s, and we were typical insolent teenagers, American-raised kids who had not the slightest appreciation of what he was talking about or of our past. Purple Rain, 16 Candles, roller skating, hip-hop, MTV. Such products of Western culture preoccupied us. In 1970, my father had convinced my mother that our growing family should leave Pakistan for the gleam of America. Our parents have been in Baltimore ever since. I barely remember my time in Karachi. The last time I did go back, the dust, which to me literally felt centuries old, was everywhere and seemed to overwhelm my lungs. The United States didn't have dust. It didn't have traffic jams that were punctuated by goats weaving between the cars, I remember thinking. Foolishly, I squandered my time in my homeland with a desire to get back to my American life and my American friends. Perhaps this was my rationale for neither searching for nor watching my father's film. Why on earth would we want to see a 1950s movie from India anyway? Subtitles? Snooze fest. And how were we supposed to find this movie? Call a blockbuster in India or something? About 15 years ago, when my father was nearly 70, the convenience of the internet finally led us to locate the movie, and we watched it together. It turns out when the editing of Footpath was complete, my father's scenes were left on the cutting room floor. Since then, we try not to bring it up. But now, as I see my aging father, I think more and more about his days in Jodhpur, India, thousands of miles away, days comprising of moving through infinitesimal moments of another language, jokes, expressions, scents, and foods, days that he now strains to remember. It was a world that he could barely bring to the United States. Heirlooms weigh too much for the displaced to bring along. Now I understand why he never told us about the other parts of his childhood, how the British Raj left the Indian subcontinent with a trail of bloodshed and trauma in its wake, how his family migrated to the newly created Pakistan, how his time in British India has crumbled in his mind. My ancestors only lived in my parents' heads, layers of dust that they dared not touch. This absence of presence is echoed in Victoria Chang's memoir about her parents leaving Taiwan for the United States. Quote, "Growing up, I held a tin can to my ear and the strings crossed oceans," end quote. From a younger generation of the South Asian diaspora, Salman Toor has crossed oceans, literal and imaginary, with his paintbrushes, paints, and canvases. Perhaps it's because his paintings have a cinematic quality and often center on a young man, but they seem to compress and map the distance between my father and me, between my ancestors and me. At the same time, his work seems to reckon with, if not try to reconcile, the West's effacement of South Asia's tragic past, its irresoluteness and reverberations. Within the history of painting and the realm of post-World War II picture making, Toor's project is highly singular, entangling a lineage of South Asian painterly ambition, an Americanness that resists assimilation, and the story of European artistic tradition that he makes slippery between the lines. Toor's work is neither about a single art history, nor about a single gaze. His paintings, with their delectable frosting-like surfaces and tendril-like brushstrokes, are aesthetic and emotional magnets. They engage in storytelling with such vivid color and line, and of such vulnerability and immediacy, that viewers, whether their roots are in the Indian subcontinent or not, are pulled in. Yes, his work is about queer desire, artistic freedom, immigrant identity, history, pillaging, and the gaze of the white colonizer, as I discuss here. But it is also about the universal experiences of seeing and being seen in our modern lives. When you lock eyes with someone across a space, when you are alone and staring at your phone. The depth and acuity to which he mines these small moments for all their allures and repulsions makes him one of the most important young painters of our time. Born in Lahore, Pakistan in 1983, Toor arrived in the United States in 2002 to attend college at Wesleyan University and study painting and drawing in Ohio, a period of, quote, safety and coziness, end quote, as he recalls. He went on to receive an MFA in painting at Pratt Institute in 2009. Toor now splits his time between Brooklyn and Lahore. By these altering viewpoints, the artist describes his work as, quote, part of a larger project of subcultured voices who update and challenge notions of identity in Western art history, end quote. He continues, quote, by creating private, deeply comfortable spaces, I hope to give dignity and safety to the boys in my paintings. Somehow this also makes me feel safe and comfortable, solidifying my context in this culture as a queer man from a Muslim cultural background, end quote. To put it simply, Toor engages in a world making where a queer brown man's hopes and anxieties for a life in both the United States and Pakistan are shared without judgment, without fear of reprisal or the constraints of reality. At turns heartwarming, melancholy, macabre, and comic, Toor's art conjures fantastical yet utterly identifiable mini-dramas, not just for brown people or the queer community, but for his generation and beyond. Diary-like, yet distinctly aware of our prying eyes, Toor's art is a concoction and collision of the historical and the contemporary, private yet public, brown not brown, LGBTIA+, and everyone else, the global and the right here. Consider two recent paintings, The Latecomer and Thunderstorm. In the first, we see a slim brown man dressed in white inside a crowded bar, flanked by an assortment of patrons, some shaded brown, some painted green or coral, all grouped in various close conversations. An unlit candle and dreary plants are in the left foreground, and on the right is a colossal brown man, his back turned to us, who gazes upon the seemingly unaware central figure. The figure in white rhymes visually with the candle in the foreground, lonely, lithe, and awaiting a flame. In the second painting, a Pakistani family is on a porch overlooking a garden. The women, all seated and wearing shalwar kameez, loose trousers paired with a long tunic, dupattas, shawls, and heels, drink from their teacups, while a fatherly figure studies a young brown man standing in a pool of mysterious liquid in the yard. Lightning flashes above. The young man wears nothing but underwear and is poised on one leg, one arm reaching over his tilted head. In both scenes, whether it be among family or peers, private or public, the narrative vacillates between intimacy and isolation. In each scene of supposed leisure and comfort, a single figure who resembles Toor either confounds the social contract of the situation or is confounded by it. Never too shy to confront the dark corners of our existence, Toor has stated that there is a direct through line from Picasso's Blue Period to Philip Guston and Nicole Eisenman in his work. Like Eisenman, time and time again, we find Toor unpacking the contradictions and complexities of social situations. In their Another Green World that you see here, Eisenman creates a stacked view of a crowded house party where guests drink, snack, pass out, zone out on their phones, play records, flirt, dance, and look out at the skyline on the balcony. The palette is unappealing and jarring, and the scene seems both autobiographical and fictional, evoking a memory of fiery bordello and yet an oasis. Eisenman's work draws on Italian Renaissance art and the Venetian tradition to create their own version of heaven and hell. In both The Latecomer and Thunderstorm, Toor's narratives similarly involve some individuals adhering to one another while others are isolated, immersed on their phones, or lost. In other paintings, Toor pressures queer relationships and vulnerability more directly. In Back Lawn from 2021, two men are embracing in the grass, enveloped by a tent, while in the lit spaces of a traditional Pakistani home behind them, a family gathers in several clusters, complete with the napping old uncle. The couple are separated from the others by the tent and the thick, misshapen shrubs and trees, hidden and protected from the family's views. The work, in both composition and subject matter, recalls the Mughal tradition of garden scenes, where lovers hide, meet, and play among lush greenery. In Krishna and the Gopis play hide and seek, 17th and 18th century Hindu writings by Bihari poets and Islamic Sufi mystics, this miniature expounds numerous strata of love, from the sensual and the playful to the immortal and the divine. Hiding love and desire is something that Toor negotiates and recalibrates depending on where he is. He readily speaks of the ways that queer lives are constrained in public and private spaces in Lahore, and how that negotiation is of lesser concern in the United States. In Back Lawn, the danger of the interaction also signifies a freedom, a contravention of cultural norms and traditions. Queer love seems to exist in Toor's Pakistan in covert, precarious moments. This is nothing new, of course. Love is never rational. As we see in Jean-Honoré Fragonard's Love is Folly, love, abuzz with a foolish grin, flutters in the air while his pink drapery falls away. As the darling of aristocratic patrons in pre-revolutionary France, Fragonard delighted in the Rococo style, exuberant, licentious subjects, awash in pastels, curls, and ruffles, a refreshing change from neoclassicism's restraint. Then and now, Love is Folly fulfills the need for fantasy and escape, emotionally and artistically. Tour's lover boys, whether they are self-referential or not, make us forget Fragonard's lily-white Cupid. Time after time, we see elongated brown and white men tangling in sheets, having pillow fights, or celebrating their own beauty, as we see here in Boy with Neck Chain, where a naked brown man on a pastel pink bed luxuriates in his own reflection. Taking the shaping of artistic identity one step further, consider Bhupen Kakar's work here, arguably the only other out South Asian male artist, flaunting his queerness in You Can't Please All. A self-portrait, the artist's naked body is seen from the rear on a balcony, witnessing an enactment of an ancient fable, a moral tale cautioning, please all and you will please none. Town residents observe a father and a son with the donkey and debate who should be riding the donkey, the portly elderly father or the young son. Realizing that one can never please all, Kakar seems to announce his disregard of those who disapprove of his sexual orientation. Rather than refusing the viewer as Kakar does, Toor turns the historical availability of brown bodies on its head. In Toor's painterly realm, brown queer lovers with tumescent noses, stubbly bodies, and elastic limbs are immersed in their own pleasure. Occasionally in Toor's work, queer love veers from the playful and comedic to sadness and death. In Over His Shoulder, a brown man's face occupies much of the canvas, painted in a pale green palette, his lips pouting, with a gaze that grips the viewer. He is in a locked embrace with another, but we can only see him in profile perdu, a glimmer suggesting impending loss. The work recalls one of Toor's favorite works, Pablo Picasso's Casa Jamas, In His Coffin from 1901, in which Picasso depicts the deceased figure of his friend who had committed suicide over an unrequited love. Just as desire can act as a mask for pain and trauma, Over His Shoulder may foreshadow tragedy. For historian Gayatri Gopinath, queer desire for an immigrant can evoke the past, but, quote, what is remembered through queer diasporic desire and the queer diasporic body is a past time and place, riven with contradictions and the violences of multiple uprootings, displacements, and exiles, end quote, not an imaginary idyllic homeland. Perhaps it is the clashes of such historical forces that threaten and seem to splinter a couple in Walking Together, where a taller brown man caresses his lover, the central figure, a shorter brown man in a white shirt with black dots, who holds hands with a third man dressed as a harlequin. This intertwining of this lover with the European historical figure is fraught, as suggested in the radiating lines around their clasping hands. French painter Louis Jaumont painted a different but similarly dangerous kind of turning back in Le Poème de l'âme, Cauchemar, from 1854, a cautionary tale of how Christian morals can lift both the body and soul to redemption. The work shows the figure of death in pursuit of a young boy, whose soul is already in the clutches of death's right arm. As the boy tries to run ahead, he dares to look back at his soul, the ground falling away from under his feet. Whereas the nightmare for Jaumot's painting was the possibility of a secular world, for Toor, the nightmare is the threat of violence for those who are queer or present as another. How do those who are most vulnerable today dare look back at their pain? And if they do, what will they see? It is unsurprising then that Toor repeatedly probes the specter of death. In Stone Throwers, we witness a mysterious act of violence, where elongated bodies prepare to hurl brick and stone on some unseen target. And in Cemetery with Dog, Toor paints a graveyard scene where Islamic tombstones are bathed in corals and lavenders. Indeed, Toor's playful, syncretic approach to artistic traditions reveals a keen understanding and appreciation of how color, line, shape, stylization, composition, brushstroke can converge to tell a story that is uniquely his own. Take, for example, his portrait of a seated boy wearing a simple beige t-shirt and shorts, his brown legs covered in hair and bent like paper clips. Resting his hand on his head, our brown protagonist, who resembles Toor, recalls the archetypal pose of Melancholia by Albrecht Dürer from 1514, an image that materialized the intellectual dilemma of the artist and has come to signify the notion of artistic genius. At the same time, Toor's Seated Boy with Sneaker speaks to the work of Indian-Hungarian painter Amrita Shergill of the early 20th century. Raised in Budapest and Paris, but ultimately settling in India, Shergill painted rural subjects such as peasants and villagers, and she imbued them with the consciousness that was notable both because of the time and her patrician background. This 1936 portrait of a lower caste boy in tattered clothes, his hand on bended knee, is not unlike Toor's Seated Boy with Sneaker in terms of palette, emotional affect, and how the body, especially the bent leg, fills the space. Toor's Brown Boy seems to be a conflation of the works by the German master Dürer and the Indian painter Shergill, artist as immigrant, artist as peasant, artist as genius. Wearing only one shoe and the other foot bare, he has one foot in one world and the other foot in another. The complexities of Toor's subjectivity as a queer South Asian living in the United States perhaps most surprisingly comes across in this work, Lazy Boy. In a horizontal composition, a brown nude lies on a sofa, cell phone close by, open laptop near his feet, and a plate of pizza perched on his stomach. This decidedly unglamorous scene of an uneventful takeout dinner is the subject of our gaze. Gravity and its constant pull, the splayed arms, the articles of clothing and book on the floor, the laptop cord, inflect the work with a downward motion, as if the body would be subsumed by the sofa. 19th century French painter Edouard Manet's The Dead Toreador is also oriented horizontally. A small pool of blood by the left shoulder and a similar pink-colored fabric left on the ground. Manet's work has been part of a larger canvas depicting a bullfight, but the artist cut out the bullfight portion of the canvas, which is now at the Frick, and isolated the bullfighter scene here. Like Manet's Toreador, Toor's flattened body suggests a fragmentation of history and place. But the fragmentation comes not from a disassembled painting, but from the assembled histories, places, and audiences of the phone, the laptop beside Toor's nude. The references in the painting from Manet's bullfighter to contemporary digital devices suggests a subjectivity and memory that jumbles not only history and place, but also freely mixes the old and the new. Shazia Sekunder's Pleasure Pillars from 2001 also spans different eras and temporalities from a post-colonialist lens, but through the entirely different techniques of layering and spontaneous mark-making. Sekunder noted, quote, "My miniatures often have insertions of two time planes. One plane is a meticulously painted surface, crafted with precision, that is in keeping with the tradition. The other is its violation," end quote. This work here commingles miniatures of archetypal women from Mughal and Rajput with a Hindu goddess and a headless Venus, and centers a self-portrait of the artist with striped spiraling horns. For both Pakistani-American artists, Toor and Sekunder, the fragmentation and reimagining of history is a necessary project in self-determination, a brown American futurity that resists total assimilation to total American culture. Mohammed Khada, one of the founders of modern Algerian art, disavowed history as a linear phenomenon. Instead, history was a piling up of provocations spanning geographies and time periods. Revolutions in art do not destroy, they accumulate, said Khada. But with accumulation, legibility is obscured, histories become entangled. Belgian painter James Ensor's Astonishment of the Mask, Waus, from 1889, presents such a piling as an uncanny mixture of reality and imagination. As we view the masked character and the jumble of theatrical objects before him, puppets, masks, violin, clarinet, skull, and lit candle, we are forced to rethink our positions on beauty, art, and mortality. And the work suggests patronage as the artist's bête noire. The piles that Toor creates in such work as museum boys of body parts, clothing, urinals, and candles recall Ensor's as well as T.S. Eliot's elegiac phrase in The Wasteland from 1922, a heap of broken images. Like Ensor, Toor dances with the grotesque, the absurd, the broken among us, but more pointedly towards pile of discarded random objects ooze mayhem, suffering, plunder, and pillage, an indictment of the Anglo-European colonizers' looting of South Asian people, land, and culture for centuries. Tour's stacks of objects are not unlike the of Philip Guston's A Day's Work from 1970, a visual metaphor for the artist for such things as the horrors of the Holocaust and American racial terror. Piles, for Tour, as for Guston, are a way to inventory history while simultaneously disavowing it, hiding it, and then making it one's own. Guston's daughter explains, quote, "My father discovered the great art and artists of the past and quite literally drew and painted a new identity for himself, leaving behind, but never fully escaping, a family beset by tragedy." End quote. Tour, too, is forging a new identity and a new language, syncretically and negating previous ones, and we are witnessing both a destruction and reinvention of the painting tradition. His flame-like strokes that record the everyday confront the sameness of a life and slow it down, accost the self-delusions and inner conversations through art and art history, swell, stretch, compress, and twist his life into a future that offers hope. After all, the pink-nosed brown peasant wearing only one shoe in museum boys, staring forlornly at the pile of liquids, objects, and human bodies in the vitrine, not only upends the white colonizing gaze by being the onlooker, but also reimagines a life for himself where he is no longer objectified and commodified, where he is liberated. Big things happen in Tour's art, encounters across cultures, violence in social settings, and the unraveling of histories. But so do small things. His paintings resonate as journal-like entries that record moments of kinship, bonding, playfulness, lust, loneliness, rejection. Pastel-inflected, gossamer-covered flights of the imagination with wispy brown boys that mind the complexities of being an immigrant, queer, and human. His practice begins with drawings in small notebooks, usually in ballpoint. From these emphatic line drawings emerge his compositions, riven with torrid brushstrokes that seem to quiver and shake. There, without physical boundaries, his imagination can conflate multiple perspectives and positions across geographies and temporalities. This simultaneous presence across multiple cultures informs a sense of what is possible by negotiating a dialectic between the universal and the local, and the present and the past. It is the same privilege of artistic freedom and capacity for futurity that allowed fellow Pakistani and famed Urdu poet Faiz Ahmed Faiz to write Sub-e-Azadi, Dawn of Freedom, a poem about Pakistan's Independence Day from British colonialism that occurred on August 15th, 1947. It's a poem that is at once gloomy and glimmering, looking inward and outward, much like Salman Toor's Beautiful World. Quote, "This blemished light, this dawn devoured by night, surely this wasn't what we've all been searching for, what we've all been aching for. The heavy darkness of night hasn't yet lessened. The moment of salvation hasn't yet come for our hearts or eyes. So let's keep going, for that destination has yet to come." Thank you. Oh, Chad, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. Let's see, we have a question from the audience. Marsha Graydon asks, what is the significance, if any, for the artist of the pink noses on the brown boys?
Yeah, I've heard someone talk about this briefly because he does get this question every so often. For any of you who have had the privilege of hearing Salman speak, he's able to transcend different registers of emotion and humor, seriousness, playfulness, being morose within seconds. And so it's that contradiction or that, ability to collide different tenors of emotions that he delights in. And so when he sees something as serious as, say, a Harlequin, a typical European subject, he begins to play with it even further, and putting something silly like a pink nose is something that he came up with and has enjoyed adding here and there.
We have another question. Someone asks, I'm curious about the significance of Toor's repeated motif of one foot in a sneaker and one barefoot, and how it mirrors the depiction of public and private spaces in his work. Is there a curatorial reading of one barefoot and one in a sneaker?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I think as with all great work, interpretations depend on the viewer, and the phenomenological response of the viewer in front of the paintings. So for me, it's not always a consistent response. Whenever I do see one foot wearing a sneaker and the other without. I would just like to say that it depends on the painting and the overall effect of being in front of the work for what I derive as its meaning. But in the case of that boy with the beige t-shirt with his knee up on the chair, that to me suggests somebody who is both able to, have the comforts of shelter, of clothing, of modernity in some ways, and then also have the ability to move backwards in time and think of a different kind of world where such luxuries were not available. That's one reading that I offered through the Amrita Shergill peasant image that I juxtaposed it with. In Museum Boys, that's such an enigmatic work. And there's so many iconographical mysteries in that work. I'm not sure I have an answer for Museum Boys, even for myself. So I leave it up to the viewer to speculate. But I do like the proposed answer of thinking about different worlds in public and private. That's really beautiful.
See if we have any other questions from the audience. I think that's it. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Asma. It was wonderful to hear from you. And I want to encourage everyone, if you haven't been to the Rose Art Museum to see No Ordinary Love, please do. It is truly a beautiful, beautiful exhibition, and it's on view through February 11th. And if you are free next Thursday, please join us for a conversation with the artist himself, Salman Toor. Thank you so much. Have a great night, everybody.
Have a great night.